First of all, I'm going to let you into a little part of my week. That's probably a scary thought to some of you. But recently, we lost our youth worker for MCC. And so we've put out for another youth worker. But in the meantime, I had to dig deep and think about youth work, because I was desperate to not just have this void in our youth work, but to make sure that they felt loved and cared for. And so we came up with this new rhythm where we have like youth breakfast on Sunday morning. They stay in the service with us. We try and reserve seating, and I look around the room, they've all sat somewhere else and I have to move the reserve seating because it looks silly. And then on a Thursday night, we open up our home in Wythenshawe to the local kids. What we find is that sometimes on a Monday night, there's a knock on the door because kids want to come and have a chat. So I find myself stood on the doorstep on a Monday night, reminding them that, yes, it's on Wednesday, and just talking to them about the week. And they check what's for tea on Thursday. They check what's for tea. And last week, we've only been doing it for a few weeks, and there's not loads that come. But last week, I opened the door, and four local lads were stood there. I was like, great. But then no one else turned up. And there was a slight disappointment in me, only slight, but realised the girls were at the scattering, so that was great, and they were messaging about that. And but my initial start was, four, that's not great. And so we started off with a game of Mafia, or multiple games of Mafia. I still don't know how to play it. I just make it up as I go. It was ADHD central. Like, I'm sat in my living room and I'm trying to play this game that I think you're meant to be quiet, but then I'd hear all these noises from these ADHD kids in the middle of it, and the storyteller would start talking about nuking the world and all this stuff, and I'm like, gosh, what is going on here? But then we got to the questions for the week, and what we usually do is we open up the Bible on what's been spoken about on Sunday, and there's questions that get sent out, and we didn't have questions for that week, so we went back a week and we were talking about the joy of forgiveness. And the question came up about God not forgiving us if we don't forgive others, and all these sort of questions came from these lads. And one of them was genuinely like a bit disturbed by that verse, and so I started to talk to him. And it was something I'd shared on the Sunday that would spoke about forgiveness, and I started to share with him, trying to explain in a way he would understand how God had revealed himself to me through that verse, or made it come alive to me. And going from like a moment of like ADHD madness in the room, you literally could hear a pin drop as these four boys listened intently, and I have never known them to be so quiet. And then one of them looked at me at the end and I said, do you understand? Like, does that help you understand? And he said, yeah, but I need your help to forgive my dad. I need you to help me through it. And then another boy turned around and he went, that's just got me right in my heart. And they were dealing with this unforgiveness stuff, this stuff that they didn't even know wasn't okay. And suddenly in that moment, that slight disappointment changed altogether. I'd seen God in that space with these four ADHD kids. I'd seen God at work, and it was really special. I then said to them, is anyone happy to pray aloud? Has anyone got any prayer requests? And we went round and we got prayer requests. Anyone happy to pray out loud? Now, when I was a kid and I went to church from being young, if you'd have asked me at that age if I wanted to pray out loud, I'd have tried to avoid it. And all of them were like, yeah, me, I'll do it. And then they prayed these prayers. And I expected flippant prayers. I expected some daft stuff. And I have never heard such heartfelt prayers. Like, I sat there with tears in my eyes as these kids prayed. And it became the highlight of my week. A moment that felt slightly disappointing at the beginning became somewhere that I saw God at work. But there's been a lot of far more disappointing moments. And that's what I want to share about today. The stuff that we didn't hope for, the things that weren't meant to be that way. And there's been a fair few of them recently, things that we didn't plan for, things that we didn't want to go through. Expectation versus reality doesn't match up. Hope is interrupted. And we have this emotional response between what we'd hope for and what life throws our way. And I've been there too many times not to recognize it. And I have to be ready, because still sometimes I find myself a little bit winded by life. I don't know if you've ever been in that place. And I found myself there again recently. Just a bit of life stuff that knocks you sideways. Things that you'd rather not be dealing with, or things that other people are dealing with that you'd rather them not have to deal with. And I have to be careful not to allow the disappointments to take me away from a place where God is wanting to work. Because if we believe God's at work all the time, then God's at work in the times where we're feeling disappointed and disheartened, as well as when life's a joy. We have to make sure, something I've learned over time is to make sure I'm not so avoidant of pain that I miss what God's doing in those moments. And it's easier said than done, because nobody likes that stuff. We'd all rather have the good stuff. I'm going to read from Luke 24:13-35. It's the road to Emmaus. Jesus' death on the cross had just happened. And two men were walking along the road to Emmaus away from Jerusalem. It says, now that same day, two of them were going to the village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days? What things? He asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but they didn't find a body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. He said to them, how foolish are you and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from the sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and they returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and said, it's true. The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. They had a short memory, didn't they? They'd heard the scriptures, they knew what was going to happen, but they weren't the only ones. They all knew what was about to happen, but in the grief of the moment, it was like they weren't allowed to think straight. That this moment wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of the plan. God was right in the middle of it, but they didn't see him. Earlier on in the chapter, the women at the tomb also needed reminding. It says on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, he's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. Then they remembered his words, but they needed reminding. They went on to tell the disciples who also didn't believe, the women. It's not like this wasn't the greatest mission of all time. It's not like they hadn't walked with Jesus and seen him do the miracles and knew what was about to happen. They'd given up jobs and left family. It wasn't a small thing. They'd seen it happen before their eyes. They'd watched him die on the cross. They'd watched the nails driven into his hand and the spear pierce his side. Just like the scripture had said. Maybe they'd followed the prophecies and ticked them off one by one. That one's come to pass, that one's come to pass, that one's come to pass. And then they get to this and they know he's going to rise, but they're not seeing it. You'd think it would be etched on their brains. You'd think they'd be waiting and expectant. God's done all this so far, so surely he's going to do it now. Up to now, it's all been proven to be true. Prophecy has been fulfilled. The Son of Man will be crucified and will rise again on the third day. Jesus had done the background work. He'd sat with them. He'd talked them through what was going to happen, telling them that he was going to die, telling them that he'd come back and rise again, breaking bread with them, reminding them that they would need to remember what he did and why he did it. But they'd already forgotten. They didn't recognise him. They needed it spelling out. They came face to face with the Son of God on the road to Emmaus and they didn't recognise him. They didn't recognise the one that walked with them. Years ago, about 5 years ago, I was on a beach in Australia and my son sent me a picture and I texted him back, "Who's this?" He sent me a picture of this guy. I was like, "Who's that?" And he texted me back saying, "Are you joking?" And I looked at the picture again and I didn't even recognise my own son because he'd had hair that was like it was ridiculous. I tried to make him cut it so many times. He had like hair that was like down here and curly and he'd suddenly cut it all off and had it styled and I genuinely did not recognise his face, my own son. And another moment we had, very first time I straightened my hair. It was years and years ago. I had it straight for 20 years. And the very first time I did, I walked past my mum and she said, "Hi, love," like I was a friend of mine. And then I heard this scream from the other room because she suddenly realised it was me that she didn't recognise. Maybe as they walked with Jesus, he was unrecognisable. But I think it's more likely that we're in that place where we find ourselves when we come face to face with a situation that we know is coming. When we know something difficult or horrible is about to happen, but then it happens. We can prepare and we can plan and we can get ready emotionally, but when it happens, that all goes out the window. The feelings kick in, disappointment rises, fear comes, grief hits, and hope can be robbed. Psychologists say that after grief or trauma, people often enter fog phases where memory, perception, and even belief becomes hazy. And I remember it well. It's like that brain fog that is just like nothing else. The indecision. Like I've been stood on an aisle of Asda looking at chopped tomatoes. It's not usually a hard decision. And I can tell you I have stood for half an hour looking at which brand of chopped tomatoes to get. Now I just go for the cheapest. I've been there with that fog where I zone out in the middle of Asda and I look around me and I think nobody knows. I'm in my own world and nobody knows what's going on. I've been there where I've walked down the aisle of Asda and I've thrown up in my hands. That is what that stuff does to you. Maybe they weren't lacking in faith, but maybe they were stuck in that state. Maybe they were still in the first stages of grief and brain fog. They just watched Jesus die a gruesome death on the cross, right before their very eyes. And as they walked on the road to Emmaus and they come face to face with Jesus, they didn't see him. That scary place of clouded vision and disappointment and loss of hope, not being able to see God in it. What I love in this moment is Jesus didn't jump in and say, "Ta-da, I'm here, I've done it, I've risen, it's finished, it's done, it's me." Maybe it was more important for them to see him when he didn't reveal himself to them. To see him when he wasn't going to be present in the flesh. He asks them a question. What is it you're chatting about? He wants to know where they're at. Maybe he wants to hear their fears and their worries, and he listens to them and he walks with them. And he talks with them, listening to their pain and reminding them of the scriptures that have been spoken. He was present in the pain and honesty before he revealed his real presence. And we can look on and we can wonder how they can be so stupid. Like, how could they not recognize him? But so often we find ourselves in that place where life sideswipes us. And we have to dig deep to remember what the promises of God over us. I wonder if, like me, you've maybe had some disappointments lately. I mean, my life's full of him. My life's been full of him, and I'm pretty used to it. But there's an expectation that it wouldn't be that way. The expectation that family would be a certain way and they aren't, and that situation wouldn't crop up years and years down the line, but it does, and people are facing things that we don't want to have to face. And sometimes it's been quite disheartening. And I'm someone who'll say, is everything okay? Yeah, it's good. Because it is, because I know God's good in it. But sometimes we just have to dig a little bit deeper. So on Sunday morning, I was getting up to speak. And what most of the room didn't know is that I'd been met with all this disappointment in the week. All these situations that I'm like, oh gosh, like I don't want to have to face this. And then I had one conversation that tipped me a little bit. And I became disheartened. And as I walked up to the stage, I literally could have thrown up. I was so anxious. And now I regularly pray an anxious prayer before I get up. The anxious prayer goes something like, God, I can't do this. You're going to have to do it because I can't do it. I need you right now. And Sunday, I said the same thing, just with a little bit of sick in my mouth. I just was like, I really can't do this morning, God. Like, if someone came up to me now and said, actually, I'm going to speak instead, I'd have been like, well done, get up there. I had to dig deep. And in that moment of stepping up, I had to hand over those disappointments and those discouragements, those things that were telling me that I shouldn't be getting up, those things that were saying you're not enough. I had to hand it over to God because disappointment was trying to rob me of God's appointments. So often we can look at situations and assume there's no good in them. I've done it myself time and time again, where you look at a disappointment or something that's happening and you go, there's no good in it. I can't see God in that. It happened to me at Christmas, some stuff going on with my kids, and I felt God say to me, can you see me? My answer was, no, I can't. Sorry, God, not this time. And he asked me to look a bit further. And as I looked, I caught a glimpse of him at work. It was a disappointing moment, but God was still at work, and I caught a glimpse of him. Some of the best moments of catching a glimpse of God, to be honest, in my life has been at the moments of disappointment. Some of the times that I've heard God speak the clearest have been in the moments that are the hardest, the moments that don't make sense. And I want eyes to see God in those moments and a heart that believes that even in those moments, God can be at work. I don't want to lose hope, even in the midst of hopelessness, even in the times where it's harder to see him. Nobody likes the God at work in the mess stuff. Much rather have God at work in the joys. I'd much rather have God at work and hear the stories of great stuff happening. But it's not always the case, and I don't want to rush away from moments of pain and disappointment without catching a glimpse of what God's doing in them, because they're just as important. Verse 16 says, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And verse 21 says, we had hoped he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped. They'd lost hope. Grieving and tired, and as they walked the Emmaus road, they walked with a lack of hope, dwelling on the negative that had happened. It wasn't meant to be that way. They were disappointed. The reality is we have a lack of understanding of God's plans, and we don't know why things happen that happen. We get frustrated because we just don't understand, and we have a tendency to doubt his presence in some of these situations. They knew the facts about the resurrection, but they still didn't believe. And we can know the promises of God over us, but in those moments, sometimes it's hard to believe that the promises of God will come to pass. And sometimes we find ourselves walking away from a place that is a place of revelation, just like they did. And I want to be someone who walks on that road with him until I see him. however long it takes. Jesus helped them to see that suffering wasn't the end of the story. And as he broke bread, their eyes were opened. And today, our eyes are open when he reveals himself to us in the midst of that brokenness. Just a moment catching sight of Jesus changes everything. And I can honestly say in some of the disappointments over the past couple of months, that in each of them, and sometimes I've had to look a little bit closer, but in each of them, I've seen a glimpse of God at work. Guaranteed, if we look close enough, we'll see him. And just a moment of catching a glimpse of him changes everything. Doesn't take it all away, doesn't make it easy, but a glimpse of him changes everything. The cross was no longer the end for them, it was the beginning. Their hope was restored, their hearts were burning, and they ran back to Jerusalem. Like the guys on the Emmaus Road who missed the bigger story of salvation because they were stuck staring at the cross through eyes of disappointment. We often lose sight of God's plan because we're stuck in the place of that unmet expectation, that disappointment of what we thought life was going to be like. God was there in the conversation. He was there in the calling to mind of scriptures, and he was there in the breaking. What these guys did is, even when they didn't recognize him, they invited him to stay. And I want to be one of those people that says, God, I can't see you, but I want you to stay. I want to stick around with me. I want to stick around with you until I see you. And I thought this morning it'd be a good place to come would be to the table, to do what he said and remember. The night before he went to the cross, he asked them to remember him, not for his sake, but for their sake, because he knew that they were going to need to. When disappointments come in, he knows that we need to remember him. Remember what he did and remember why he did it and remember the plan that he chose to walk. He knew that remembering him would take us past our disappointments and into that place of hope. Hope that changes everything. Hope that saw not just Christ crucified, but Christ the conqueror. The cross that saw the ultimate surrender. The ultimate rescue plan played out. One that might have looked disappointing as they walked the Emmaus Road. But one that he was in, the plan that was the redemption plan. And whether we're in the room or maybe there's people that watch this online, we're going to take communion. And I want to read from Luke 22. He took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." I like to imagine how he felt, not because I like the thought of it, but because it's quite sobering if we put ourselves in the shoes of Jesus and we think about that moment as he broke bread. And I wonder, as he tore the bread, saying, "This is my body," I wonder whether his heart began to beat that little bit faster. I wonder whether he had the nauseous feeling of, I'm about to go to the cross. I've said yes to this plan, and now it's about to happen. We can prepare. But when the moment comes, it changes everything. I wonder, as he broke the bread, it isn't just a nice breaking of bread, but I wonder whether his body began to have the effects of what he was about to do, whether his breathing got heavier. This was it. I said I was going to do it. I knew it was coming. I've given my yes. But gosh, please remember what I did for you. This is my body about to be broken. Whatever you do, do not forget it. Don't take lightly the sacrifice I'm about to make, because I'm not taking it lightly. And when you face disappointment, remember this moment. When life doesn't look like you thought it was going to look, remember me. This is how much I love you. After supper, he took another cup of wine and said, "This cup is a new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice." And I wonder again, as he poured out the blood, the wine, and drank it and said, "This is my blood shed for you." Whether his veins flowed more evidently than ever before, whether his body pulsated as he remembered what he was about to do, this was it. This is my blood, the blood that pulses through my body. This blood will be shed. This blood will be poured out to death, all of it emptied for you. Remember what I did and don't lose sight of it. In 1 Corinthians, it tells us, do this often in remembrance. Remember my sacrifice often. Look to the cross and remember what I did, and look to heaven and remember the hope of my return. Remember it often, because you're going to need it often. You're going to need to come back to hope. Remember that I have a plan that's worth it, a plan that's worth surrendering to even when disappointment looms. So we're going to remember.